Welcome once again to the Sage. Thank you for being our wonderful companions on this journey. I hope you watched our episode last week when we began an amazing and very, very interesting discussion with our guest, Professor Ufodike. It's been so amazing. In fact, we didn't even want to break that last week's session. But we continue because he kindly consented for this second episode to happen. But there was something he said last week as he described his own experience in Nigerian politics when a few years ago he decided to take the bull by the horn and come back and contest as a governor in one of the states in this country, in Anambra State, where he comes from. And before we continue to discuss the current political situation, which is the all-consuming topic for all of us in the country, I just had a thought to ask him. So there you were, with your teaching jobs and your enterprise in Canada. One day you felt inspired, decided to come do your own bit here in Nigeria and run to be governor. What did your family say to you? What did they have to say? Because as we talk, others who are listening need to understand the mountains you scaled. Was your wife overjoyed at because that's why I said the courage. It takes courage. Courage is required when there are difficulties, right?
Right.
So how did you surmount it? What did your family think about it?
So she thought I'd lost my mind, but in fairness to her, so did my family here as well. So, but it came from a place of genuine concern. People were worried about, not surprisingly, my personal safety, for example. There's sometimes politics gets unduly aggressive. In Nigeria. I was once on a business trip to Nigeria with a Canadian business partner of mine. This was before 2017. And on the way to the airport, we drove through a rally. There was a rally going on somewhere around Yaba, Onikon. We were headed to the airport. And, you could see him. There's people on the street and, loud music and, a lot of the political operatives. Mm-hmm. And you could see him, start to blush. He was turning red, and he is a Caucasian gentleman. And he essentially froze. He was not breathing, right? I did not realize that until we kind of got past the traffic, and then he looked at me and said, "What was that?" I said, "Oh, that's a political rally." He goes like, "They're all on the same side?" I said, "Yes." He says, "Oh, I wouldn't want to be on the other side of that." So that's a political rally. They were all from the same political party, but even the aggression and people kind of
jostling each other
was beyond understanding to a Canadian. So it came from a place of genuine concern, but folks were clearly anxious, and perhaps that's the reality. Is this right? If you're going to do politics in Nigeria, I think there's something to be said about having the right amount of I'll just say the right amount of crazy, or perhaps, let me say, turpitude or resilience, right? It's, again, if you're going to insert yourself in a situation where things have always been done differently, it's going to take a bit of, like our Twitter family say, violence. So it's going to require some temerity. Yeah.
Yeah, it really does. It requires courage. It requires the ability to convince, because in the end you have to convince and persuade. Because I see their point entirely. They're worried about your safety, but also about security. You're being, particularly when your family is in the diaspora, domestic care and so on, and becoming part of the time a one-parent family can be tough. Yeah. So I fully, she herself deserves a heroship award. But let me just, before I move on to the other thing, say, what about your children? What do you think it was? How did they take it?
So my children have always been my biggest political fans. And even when I ran, ran for office in Canada, so every time I went to an event, We had 3 kids then. So my daughter, Zara, and the twins. We have 4 right now. They were all under 5. They would have front row seats and they would clap at everything I said. And that kept me going. Even when the rest of the audience was staring at me blankly. I had 3. I could count on those 3 votes in the front. Now there's 4 of them, and the kids, are very supportive. Obviously, they're also young and might not understand, the full implications of what it means to perhaps run for office in Canada versus Nigeria. But my kids, they're my biggest fans when it comes to politics.
They think Daddy is a hero.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Okay, that is nice to hear. So, Ako, now we're very much, politics is our bread and butter. It's the most almost consuming topic for us in Nigeria, and rightly so. What about this time round? Are you thinking of embarking on anything political directly?
So no, I'm not running this time. But obviously watching the situation very closely and with very keen interest. Just like any Nigerian in the diaspora should. So diasporans obviously are responsible for Nigeria's largest source of foreign exchange. So if you're in the diaspora, you contribute more FX to Nigeria than crude oil, right? But yet we don't have voting rights in Nigeria. The recent modifications to the Electoral Act, the Senate voted against granting voting rights to the diaspora. So clearly we have a vested interest in this election because, perhaps the way advocacy works is, you get a candidate who's friendly towards your plight, and hopefully they can bring about that change that you'd like to see. So we have an economic stake in Nigeria because, again, a lot of social programs here are funded by Nigeria. If there's no social welfare in this country, social welfare is really one that's communal. It's driven by family. It's driven by family that's in some instances overseas. And so I'm watching with keen interest, and I think everyone in the diaspora should. And I think clearly everyone in Nigeria should. We've seen an uptake in the increase in voter registration. I watched with disappointment, I think a couple of days ago, where INEC said, if I have my math correct, I think close to half of the new registrations are being thrown out.
1.something million.
Yeah. So, which is a real shame. Over short-sighted internal policies, nothing to do with the Electoral Act, nothing that needed presidential consent, but just administrative backwardness. So the situation, if you missed it, is if you had an existing registration and you attempted to register, so you try to find it, perhaps maybe your name's misspelled. Maybe rather than have you in the system as Ufodike, they had you as Ufodika. And so you couldn't find it when you tried to go online to find your previous registration to maybe move it to a different polling location. You then went ahead to re-register. What they've done is they've thrown out your new registration and kept that incorrect registration that you can't even find in the first instance.
I listened to that too myself.
So that's going to leave a lot of people disenfranchised. And people obviously start to think again it's about the politics of excluding people, right? We should be celebrating the historical registrations that we've seen because that's going to give voice to a lot of people, who had never voted in the past, either because of their age, they were less than 18 the last election, but also a lot of people who had been politically passive and have now been engaged following, again, the NSAS movement. It's a shame that some of those voices are going to be stifled because of this recent INEC pronouncement. Takeaway, though, is everyone in country, everyone in the diaspora should all be watching this election with keen interest.
Absolutely. I agree with you on so many points. The fact that the diaspora, a pity indeed, like you said, that they can't vote. although for many other developed countries, people in the diaspora do vote, particularly when you have safe and secure virtual electronic voting that can be done. And you underscore the importance of the diaspora, both in terms of remittance and the fact that many of the people in the diaspora actually provide a safety net for their relatives in this country, whether it's their parents and so on. It's the funds they bring back into the country that make the difference between life and death in many situations. Yes, and on the stage, we shall also, in the coming weeks, discuss this issue about voting, about the electoral register, and so on. Our youth segment is also going to discuss it because it has very important ramifications, and I'm sure many Nigerians are waiting. I like to believe that the discussion is not over. INEC, I do agree with you. I listened a few days ago, actually, to the INEC information officer discuss that and discuss about all the disqualified registrations. There is an urgent need to revisit it, but we hope INEC is listening, and that because of the feelings, many of us Nigerians feeling this way, that something will be done. Because we must, this time round, provide as many legitimate Nigerians the opportunity to vote as possible. So yes, I agree with you. Even as I ask you to tell us a bit more about what also would you advise in terms of what we need to do right to make sure that the 2023 and other elections that are coming up deliver the best results for the country. Yeah.
So political participation can A, be voting. It could be B, running for office. Or C, going out and actually supporting the candidate that best reflects your values. But quite often we look at civic participation as just voting, right? So that's, for me, that's the baseline. Everyone should be voting. There's, like you said, prior to now, there's always been voter apathy. In the last election, for example, the last Nigerian election, there was also an election in Canada. There was about the same number of votes cast in both countries. The difference, though, is Nigeria has 200 million people, Canada has 30 million people, but the same number of votes were cast in both countries. So there's always been political apathy. But I think that's about to change, or was about to change. Again, I won't go back and address the INEC issue, but I think that's about to change this time around. People are a lot more engaged. They're taking that engagement from social media, and I think it's going to translate to engagement, in brick and mortar in the real world, and rightly so. So, we've talked extensively as Nigerians about the problem of bad leadership. We've not talked enough about the problem of bad followership, if there's such a word. And that's A, selling your vote, B, voting irresponsibly, if there's such a word, or really political apathy, right? Not participating and sitting down and being an armchair commentator later on and criticizing the product of an election. Not voting during an election is actually a vote, right? So if in the last election you hoped for change and you did not vote, you can assume you voted for the status quo. It's not. It's a safe bet. And so what do I expect will happen differently this time around? I think you're going to see people take on their civic responsibility, take it a lot more seriously, right? We're going to have that, hopefully, that followership start to take its position. The passive, silent majority are going to say, well, I get one of these, I get to exercise it once every 4 years, and I'm going to do so right now without fear, intimidation, and I'll do it, with a lot of seriousness, recognizing what the implications are for myself, but also for the future generations of this beautiful country.
You know, Uncle, what you just said resonates deeply with us on the stage and on C4C. For the past few weeks, we put out a call of action. I made a call of action, and we called on the silent majority. We first of all declared that the vast majority of us Nigerians are good people. We're people who mean well. We're people who have given our lives blood and worked for this country. We ask that those of us like that, the vast majority, rise up for the first time. And it's with joy that we're beginning to see that happen. And I also want to underscore what you said, which is so important, the fact that a non-vote, inaction, is actually negative action. It is when the good keep silent that the bad get away with what they do.
Absolutely.
And so, absolutely, not voting is actually casting your vote for the wrong cause. Everybody must vote. But again, you're saying things that are resonating with me, that it's not just, it doesn't end with votes, it also ends with followership, courage to run for office. Many times it has to be at a cost, and, to face that cost, accept it, and to run. And we can no longer afford to be biased armchair philosophers and watch things unfold in our country, sitting in our chairs only in our homes. Everybody must act. So, great words of wisdom. Totally agree with you. Anything else you want to tell us about the forthcoming election? Well,
yeah. So while something just came to mind actually when you were speaking, and I'll likely get the numbers right, but the overall thesis of what I'm about to say is correct. So I looked at voting data. I met with a few students from University of Lagos many years ago, would have been around maybe 2016, 2017, politically active students. And I brought to their attention, I had looked at the voting data in that local government, whatever it's called, Akoka 1, for example. And I looked at what the State House of Rep individual had won the election by. I looked at the Federal House of Rep election as well. The State House of Rep individual won by something like maybe 40,000 votes. That's what he got. Unilag has 80,000 students. So clearly, there's no reason why a Unilag student should not be the House of Rep person for that local government.
If he came out and everybody voted
that's right.
for him. Yeah.
If the students were able to essentially harness their votes, support one of their own, chip in, the student union, asked everyone to chip in 100 naira, 100 naira times 80,000, I think that's perhaps impactful enough. And like I said, those numbers wouldn't be exact, but the overall thesis is accurate, which is it was such a low hurdle for a student who decided, I'm going to run for the House of Reps.
And who mobilized
his constituency. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
to win.
And that thesis is likely true for every city in this country, every local government that has a university, right? Because if you think about it, like if you go to Ibadan, for example, and the University of Ibadan maybe has even more students. If you go to the University of Nigeria and Nsukka, that particular constituency for the State House of Rep, any university, a young person from that university who has, the right sort of mobilization agenda can probably end up emerging as the elected candidate. The point in that story is there's a lot of focus and a lot of obsession about national politics, about the presidency. I would also encourage people to also be mindful of governance at all tiers of government, right? So we also have to get it right at the states, we have to get it right federally, we have to get it right at the ward level, across all tiers of government. And the further down we get, perhaps the more impactful our votes can be, right? As young people, quite often located on campuses across the country.
I think that's a beautiful place to take a short break. And when we come back, explore further this issue of young people the potential impact of young people, because your examples have been beautiful, have led to that. So join us again when we take a short break and we come back and discuss the potential impact of young people on the elections. Wow, thank you for having been with us, having stayed with us. When we took a short break, Ako had gotten to a very interesting point where he mentioned the potential impact of young people, if young people mobilize themselves. And it's something that is passionate to my heart, not just because Conversations for Change, the SAGE, is all about empowering predominantly young people, but the fact that also I'm something of a little of an expert on issues of population and demographics, in saying that the young people form the huge majority of this country. I know that approximately, actually 80% of people of this country, 80% of the population of this country are people under 40 years. It's a huge majority. Even when you just take the votable age, it's still huge. So the potential impact of young people. But I'm also passionate about young people, because I say that this country belongs to you by the very nature of the fact that you have longevity, you have life. People like me in the next 10, 15, 20 years are gone. That is usually a maximum lifespan. You will stay. Those are the way things are, because young people will continue to be our today and our tomorrow. The country belongs to you. It is yours, therefore, your responsibility to influence what happens. So what do you think? My question, therefore, after that long, is what do you think about the potential power and impact that young people can have if they came out and tried hard to influence the elections that are coming positively, trying their best to ensure that it's the right candidature, and like you said, across all levels, not just president, that we put in the right candidates in positions so that things can be better for our country. So what do you think young people can do?
Great. So I'll just kind of piggyback on what I said earlier on about the three ways we can participate politically. So obviously, if you're a young person and you're not already a candidate, we can rule that out, right? But that's something to aspire to. That leaves us with voting, which, like I said, is the baseline, but also getting involved and supporting the candidates that best reflect your values. You nailed it when you said, Nigeria is a young country. I mean, life expectancy, I believe, is in the mid-50s. So clearly, most Nigerians are young. They're under 40. In fact, I was looking at INEC registration data, and I noticed that over 49, I think the age, the band 49 to 60 was classified as elderly. So I believe you're over 49 in Nigeria. You're elderly. Which I mean, in my view, I mean, it's mid-age. I'm saying that because I'm teasing. I'll be coming up on that soon. But anyways, and I don't see myself as elderly. But anyways, so I think with that, the number of registrations we've seen in the 18 to 29 age group, if that group turns out en masse for the candidate that best reflects their values, if that demographic, goes out and gets involved in some kind of mobilization, right? You go out, you volunteer for your candidate, and I mean, again, let's find ways to translate this from social media to the real world. Right?
To actually
to absolutely communicating with people, mobilizing, going out and engaging with other voters on behalf of your candidate. I think we can I'm outside of that threshold right now. They can make the most impact in this coming election. And that demographic's always been looked at as being a highly unreliable voter base. But I think they have an opportunity to stun the sort of institutional approach to thinking and the institutional approach to doing politics in Nigeria. So that would be my recommendation. Everyone in that demographic has to vote. Every Nigerian who's legally registered to vote needs to take advantage of that opportunity. And secondly, for the young folks, I'm going to encourage them to also consider going out and working for a candidate. So volunteering on a campaign. Dare I say, even giving to a campaign. 1,000 naira, 2,000 naira. Let's also vote with our checks. Because as I alluded to earlier on, good campaigns require resources, and I think it's a way of ensuring that the right individual wins the election. I won't repeat the previous comments that while we're focused on the presidential, there's impact to be made across all the elections. It will be a shame if parties do well nationally, right, in terms of the number of voters, and they don't have the spread, because all politics is local, right? So at the end, you're going to have to elect people into the state house, people into the federal house, people into the Senate for any party to govern meaningfully. And so to do that, this election cannot just be about the presidential election. It has to be across all tiers of government.
That is so profound. That is so true and so important. There's so much more I would love to discuss with you, but I know that we have limited time. So I'm going to zero you into what about Nigerians like you in the diaspora? How do you see yourself contributing to this effort so that young people impact what is happening and we bring out meaningful right leadership in the future? What can the people in the diaspora do?
So if you're in the diaspora, next time you're sending $100 down to support a family in Nigeria, you should try and influence who they're voting for. I mean, if you think there's someone who's better able to improve the Nigerian economy and help, salvage the current situation we find ourselves in, you can obviously participate that way if you're not registered to vote.
In advocating with your family and your friends.
Absolutely. In my case, I'm registered to vote. I mean, that's even better. Come back and vote. And the whole approach of, during elections, people leave and go to their villages, that has to stop. You have to stay wherever it is you live and vote there and make an impact in that way. But to folks in diaspora, I mean, I think we have every right. I mean, we have an economic interest in this country to support the candidate of our choice. So give to those campaigns and also advocate with, those who look at you as being their safety net or the provider of their social welfare. Make the case that perhaps what candidate best reflects, hope for this country at this time.
Two very, very important pieces of advice. And I again, forgive me if I re-echo them, that advocacy is important. In the same way that you're providing financial support for many of your relatives and friends in the country, also advocate and do your best to persuade them to vote what hopefully is the right candidate. Those who can vote should please, by all means, come and vote. Who are registered legally to vote, it's their right. They should come and vote, and so on. So important. And I hope all our young people within country and in diaspora are listening. Ako, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful time with you. Can I ask you to turn to our audience once more and say your parting words from your heart? What would you be saying to us Nigerians, to many other young people in and outside the country, as words of advice?
So change sometimes comes from within, sometimes change comes from outside. So to everyone who's in Nigeria, in my case, I mean, I got involved. It wasn't easy, but it was impactful, I think, in many ways. And also it actually resulted in some exposure that I wasn't aware off. I did get an invitation afterwards to chair the economic policy team for a presidential candidate in the last election. I won't mention which one. And that only came about because of the fact that that individual had seen that I had come back and I had run in a political process, and they became aware of my background, and they felt I had something to contribute to their policy platform. To those who are in diaspora, change can come from outside. Karl Marx talked about the concept of the free-floating intelligentsia, right? People who lived outside of a structure but could see the gaps and deficiencies in that structure. And in many ways, he was referring to the diaspora back then, to the Russian diaspora. And in this case, I'm referring to you, the Nigerian diaspora as well. I think we have a role to play. We live outside of the structure. We can see the gaps in the structure, and we can see ways to enhance it and improve it. And I think it falls on all of us to do what we can in our way to make Nigeria a better place for everyone. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Those are profound words of wisdom. I'm sure that all our children in the diaspora had that, because it leaves the responsibility equally. While the young people in the country will do and should do their best and must do their best, our young people in the diaspora also have a huge responsibility to support that and to do what they can do also, so that we turn this country round for the better, for the good of all of us, but most importantly for the good of you young people who will be here for a long time. And so thank you once again, Professor Akolisa. Thank you for being with us. Thank you to our wonderful audience who have been with us through the two programs he graced us with. I'm sure you agree with me that every bit of this discussion was so illuminating, was so important. It's a beautiful conclusion to our diaspora discussions. I count myself blessed to have had the opportunity to travel recently and to be with them be with many of our young, beautiful Nigerians, both in Canada and the US. I think the movement has indeed begun. It is a movement that will not stop. Many of them are already pledging to help us, to work with us, to encourage us in country, so that 2023 and so on will bring a better life for us in terms of leadership of our country. We thank you all. Please do continue to be with us. It's a pleasure to be the sage on this journey. Thank you. See you next week.